Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyachade Shatarne Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchkalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha. Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Grantaraj Shri Isopanisad ki jai. Right, so devotees, we're just going to go straight into it this evening. We began the introduction. The introduction is, what is it? It's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 4 or 5 pages, around about that. And we went through just part of the first page, actually, because we were just making a start. And so last night, towards the end, we were going through we went through the first 4 paragraphs of the introduction. And the main thing that we were focusing on was that in order to get knowledge, it is not a good idea to ask a conditioned soul. Not a good idea. If it's an advanced devotee, that's another thing. But a conditioned soul, we should not ask conditioned souls, particularly for like substantial knowledge about what is life, and who are we, how should we live, what is our nature, what is the nature of this world. To ask a conditioned soul is a bad idea. It's really not a good idea at all. And of course, as we go through the introduction further, and through the book further, for that matter, it'll become more and more clear that if we really want knowledge about these foundational aspects of life, we have to approach the Vedas. But anyway, here, Srila Prabhupada, he's giving a class, and he's examining in some detail what is the disqualified position, unqualified position of the conditioned souls when it comes to giving that foundational knowledge of life. And the problem that he really focuses on is that the conditioned souls have 4 defects. They have 4 defects. We read through 3 of them last night. Let me just, we can remind everyone, what are those 4 defects? To make mistakes, to be illusioned, cheating, and to have imperfect senses. So we read through the first 4 paragraphs of the introduction, and they were discussing the first 3 of those 4 defects. To make mistakes, to be in illusion, and to cheat. And now in the 5th paragraph on the first page, Srila Prabhupada discusses about having imperfect senses and the position that puts us in, and how that disqualifies us for being sources of really valid knowledge, in-depth knowledge of what is life, who are we, these most foundational questions. Okay, so we read about making mistakes. The example was Gandhi. Then we read about being illusioned. The problem is our illusion, I mean, we have many illusions actually, but the basic illusion number one, is that we think we are these bodies, but we are not. And how are we going to understand anything if we don't even know who we are, what we are? What is our nature? What is the likelihood that if in that condition we try to understand the rest of life and how we should live, if we don't know who or what we are? It's completely ridiculous. So now in the fifth paragraph, on the first page of the introduction, there's the brief discussion about imperfect senses. And Srila Prabhupada makes the point of how people are very proud of their eyes. But our eyes are very lacking in potency. Sometimes people ask us, can you show me God? In fact, I remember when I was in England many years ago, it was the early to mid 70s, so at least 45 years ago, or a little more even than 45 years. And I was distributing Srila Prabhupada's books on the main street of London, Oxford Street. And one sort of wild hippie came up to me, very sort of, wild hair and not nicely dressed and just looked like a real misfit. He came up to me in a real mood and he said, "Can you show me God?" And before I could even answer, he just said, "No, you can't." And, so why should I take you seriously? And off he went. And it was just, it was pretty crazy, actually. It was pretty crazy. But, okay, you want to see God, but you don't have the eyes to see God, because Krishna is spiritual, Satchitananda. He's not flesh and blood like us. So actually, Krishna is here with us in this room. Krishna is with you in your room, wherever you are, in whatever part of the world you happen to be. We have at the moment, we have roughly, taking our seminar, we have roughly, it's between 400 and 500 people. It's closer to 500 devotees. Yeah. So, yes. So there's so many of us, but we don't have the eyes to see God. And we're practicing devotees. Krishna is in the room here with us. Krishna's in your room. Wherever you are around the world, devotees from Russia, from the UK, from India, and different parts of Africa, different parts of Europe, and I don't know wherever else. Wherever we are, Krishna is with us, but we can't see him. Of course, there is another point which is covered when we go into the main part of the text of the book. It's around the mantra number 5. It's around there, where Srila Prabhupada talks about deity worship, that Krishna is so kind to the devotees that he accepts the deity form, which we can see and worship and deal with. But otherwise, in the general sense, we don't yet, at this stage, have the eyes for seeing God. Just like, and Prabhupada, Prabhupada gives an example. If it's nighttime and you are in some room in a house, and then suddenly they turn the lights off. They turn the lights off. And now you're just in darkness. And I'm sure you know what it's like. You know, as soon as they turn the lights off, at that moment, there's total darkness because your eyes were adjusted to the light. Then gradually your eyes sort of adjust to the dark, but still, when it's dark, it's dark. And it's much more difficult to see than when the room is nicely lit up. So our eyes have many defects. We cannot see in the dark. I remember my mother used to tell me when I was a child, eat your carrots. If you eat carrots, then you'll see in the dark. So I would eat my carrots thinking, oh, I'm going to see in the dark. But I can inform you all that after eating many carrots over many years, I don't recall being able to see in the dark. I think it was just a mother's trick to get the child to eat his veggies. Oh, yes. And, you know, of course, there are other ideas. If something is very small, then we can't see it with our eyes. We may need a microscope or something of that sort. If something is very far distant, we may need a telescope because our eyes have limitations. Even though we can see, of course we can see, but we can see in limited ways. And like this principle applies to all our senses. They function. We see with our eyes, we hear, we touch, we smell, and so on. These different sensory functions are there, but they are imperfect. They're imperfect. If someone calls to us from just somewhere across the road, we may not hear because our senses can only hear so far. An example which Prabhupada gives elsewhere is that if the sun is there or the moon is there at night, then we look up in the sky and the sun, it looks like some small disk. But we know actually it's many times bigger than the Earth planet, which by our standards is very big. You know, to travel around the world, that's a big thing. Yes, so our senses are imperfect. And like this, because of these 4 defects, the conditioned soul is not in a position in and of himself or herself, just in terms of how we are, we're not in a position to give really good foundational knowledge about life and who we are, what we should do. Why is this world here? What is its purpose? Of course, we can learn from authoritative sources, but that's another thing. As we said, here we're talking about in and of ourselves. As we come, with no addition from outside, we're not good. So therefore, in this fifth paragraph then, Prabhupada says, we cannot therefore expect knowledge, Veda, with these imperfect senses, with all these deficiencies in conditioned life. We cannot give perfect knowledge to anyone, nor are we ourselves perfect. Therefore, we accept the Vedas as they are. Anyway, Prabhupada's going to explore that point coming up now. But just to recap over this whole, the shortcomings of the conditioned soul, that whole situation, just think in these terms. I mean, there are different ways of looking at it, but think in these terms. First of all, with our imperfect senses, we perceive the world, ourselves, everyone else wrongly. Then with whatever misunderstandings, wrong ideas that we've got from our imperfect senses about the world and life, then whatever those wrong perceptions are, we apply in mistaken ways. We apply those wrong understandings and we make mistakes in how we apply them. And we apply them in an illusory understanding of life. And then on top of that, we cheat, including cheating ourselves. Like just a typical example, or maybe a couple of people cheating themselves. Someone is smoking cigarettes, and everybody knows, I would say every smoker knows, that smoking cigarettes is dangerous and it has shortened the lives of many people. And many of those smokers think, yes, I should stop, I must stop, and they try to stop, but they don't stop. They know it's clear. So what does it mean? It means they're cheating themselves. Or sometimes you may go on a diet because you know you need to eat less. But after a little while you think, well, a little more. It's okay. It's not. Tomorrow I'll eat less or something. We cheat ourselves. Okay, so now the subject changes. In our text, which we have provided to all of you students, I hope you have it, we're at the bottom of page 3. We're at the bottom of page 3, going over onto page 4. It's a fairly extensive paragraph. And Srila Prabhupada here, it is paragraph 6 on page 3. Prabhupada goes into the discussion about what is Krishna consciousness, what are the Vedas? And Prabhupada raises the point that you may call the Vedas Hindu. Many people think like that. Many Hindus think like that the Vedas are Hindu. But Prabhupada makes the point, Hindu is a foreign name. Yeah, I'm sure you know the story when the Muslims were invading whenever it was, some hundreds of years ago. They were like repeatedly coming and going and coming and going and staying and going and coming. And so they referred to what we call currently India as the land on the other side of the Indus River, or the Sindhu River. Sindhu, with an S. Sindhu. But somehow, the way Prabhupada explains it, they couldn't really pronounce the letter S, so they called it the Hindu. Oh, on the other side was the Hindu River, and on the other side, because they were coming from the west, on the other side, in what we call India now, they called that the people who lived there, the Hindus, because they lived on the other side of the Sindhu, what they called the Hindu River. So the tradition, Prabhupada makes the point, which it's a famous point, and Prabhupada has made it so many times. We are not Hindus. And our process, our religion, or the process we're following for our development in life and spiritual development and for God realization, it is not Hinduism. So what is it? What should we call it? Well, here it's interesting. Srila Prabhupada says that actually our real identification is Varnashram. That's interesting. Now, at other times, Prabhupada has said Sanatan Dharma. He's said that on quite a number of occasions. But here he says our real identification is Varnashram. And Varnashram denotes the followers of the Vedas. And so what is that Varnashram? Well, it's 4 Varnas and 4 Ashrams. 4 Varnas, Prabhupada first of all lists them out. We're in the 6th paragraph of the introduction. There's Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras. Brahmins are the more intelligent ones. Kshatriyas are administrators. Vaishyas are mercantile. And Sudras are like laborers, working class. So, and then of course there are the ashrams, which Prabhupada doesn't really go into here, but we can just mention. For young people, brahmachari, then through the mature years up to sort of approaching older age is grihastha or household life. And then at the beginning of older age is vanaprastha or retired life. And then in old age is sannyas, fully renounced life. Now, Srila Prabhupada makes the point here, and it's an extremely important point. It's really just something of the greatest importance, is that this is not some sort of attempt to present some special philosophy that there's a student stage of life, a household stage of life, a retired stage, and a renounced stage. And there are people who are more intelligent. There are people who are more administrative or sort of ruling class even. And then those who are like business class, productive, they may own industries or some sort of agricultural projects. And then there's working class. This is not some esoteric special philosophy which you find only in Krishna consciousness. As Prabhupada says here, these natural classifications are found everywhere. It's just like life is just like that. This has got nothing to do with belief. Do you believe that when people are young, like up to their, say when they're 20 or something like that, do you believe they should be educated? Well, not really. It's not like the Hare Krishnas believe that everybody else believes something else. It's just that's the way people understand life. Children, up to the beginning of more real maturity, they must be educated. So as Prabhupada says, these natural classifications are found everywhere. And these are Vedic principles. And Prabhupada goes on, we're still in the same paragraph, that these Vedic principles, once you learn about them and how accurate they are, like this is just one idea of how accurate, one aspect of how accurate they are, about the different stages people go through in their lives and the different types of occupations that people take up. This is just one aspect of Vedic truth, but there are many others. And therefore Prabhupada says that Vedic principles are accepted as axiomatic truth, that they're just true. And Prabhupada gives a couple of other examples here. Well, actually he gives one, but elsewhere Prabhupada has given another one, or a couple actually. Axiomatic truths, which are stated in the Vedas, things which are true. And in the case of these things, the examples Prabhupada gives, you might not expect them to be true, but they are true. And the Vedas say they're true. And in this way, we should be ready to accept what is stated in the Vedas. So the example Prabhupada gives here in this same 6th paragraph is of cow dung. Cow dung is stool, the stool of an animal. And obviously everybody knows that stool is just out. We have nothing to do with stool because it's just so contaminated. And if somehow someone contacts it, then it's so contaminating that stool. But now here we have cow dung. According to the Vedas, it's pure. And by scientific analysis, it is found that it is pure. That if you have a sore, for example, Prabhupada says here, if you smear cow dung in an impure place, that place becomes pure. It seems contradictory because stool is extremely impure. But this is stated in the Vedas, and it's true. And the other two examples that I wanted to give is, one is conch shell. Conch shell is bone, what they call exoskeleton. You know, we have, our skeletons are within our bodies. For those animals, then the underwater, whatever, creatures of that sort, then they have the conch shell, which is outside of their bodies, but it's bone. is just exoskeleton, external. So it's bone, and bone is also impure. I don't know if you've ever touched bone, like not conch shell, but like bone, and your hands become dirty just from touching it. And you can wash it, but still you touch it, your hands become dirty. Another example, same sort of idea, is ivory. Ivory is also pure. It's also bone, but it's pure. Srila Prabhupada talks about it. And all these things, ivory and conch, in the Vedas, they're described as being pure, even though you would expect them not to be. So like this, this is Prabhupada's presenting evidence to encourage us to accept the Vedas. And of course, so we go on to, now we're on to page 4, and it's I'm calling it the second paragraph. It's the paragraph which begins on page 4. In India, if one person tells another, you must do this, the other party may say, what do you mean? Is this a Vedic injunction that I have to follow you without any argument? And, not so much now, but it's still there to some degree in Indian society, that the Vedas are taken very seriously in terms of how they describe different aspects of life in general, like Ayurveda. Ayurveda is Vedic medicine. It's Vedic medicine. And of course, I'm sure you're all well aware that it's become very popular in the last, 20 years or 30, whatever, but within our lifetimes, at least certainly within my lifetime, it's become popular, Ayurveda. It's a different approach to medicine, but it works. And it's Vedic. It's actually Vedic. Yeah. So then in the third paragraph on page 4, the Vedas are not compilations of human knowledge. So Srila Prabhupada makes the point, Vedic knowledge comes from the spiritual world, from Lord Krishna. And sometimes, at least certain aspects of Vedic knowledge, or a fairly, like half of it even, is called Shruti. We'll be discussing Shruti and Smriti, these two divisions of Vedic knowledge, after a week or two or whatever, after a little while, a couple of weeks actually. Anyway, a little while. But Prabhupada's talking here about that section of the Vedas, which is Shruti. And Shruti refers to the knowledge which is acquired by hearing. It's not experimental knowledge. And Srila Prabhupada gives very interesting example that Shruti, or the Vedas, is considered to be like a mother. And we get so much knowledge from our mother. And Prabhupada gives the example, if you want to know who your father is, ask your mother. I mean, obviously, generally, it's just obvious, but if somehow or other it's not, and you want, or if you want to just make sure, ask your mother. She knows who your father is. So the Vedas are like the mother. And they can identify our father, who is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That in fact is what the Vedas are all about, as Krishna discusses in Bhagavad Gita. Vedaischa Savir Aham Eva Vedyo. By all the Vedas, I am to be known. Yes. So Shruti, Vedic knowledge, is like the mother and can identify for us our Father Krishna. And of course, the example is given that, Prabhupada says, it's not possible to experiment to find out whether someone is your father or not. How are you going to do an experiment? Well, you could, I suppose, maybe DNA, I don't know. But otherwise, just in general terms, how are you going to experiment? How will you, if your mother doesn't tell you somehow, how are you going to find out? Are you going to just go and ask everyone, are you my father? No, you need your mother. Yeah. So therefore, because it's beyond our experience. So for knowledge which is beyond our experience, Prabhupada explains in the same paragraph, if you want to know something beyond your experience, beyond your experimental knowledge, beyond the activities of the senses, you have to accept the Vedas. There's no question of experimenting. It's already been experimented and settled. The version of the mother has to be accepted as truth. There's no other way. So Srila Prabhupada goes on in the 4th paragraph on page 4, which begins, the Vedas are considered to be the mother. And Brahma is called the grandfather, the forefather, because he was instructed in Vedic knowledge by Lord Krishna. And then Srila Prabhupada, in different places, we're going to be looking at parampara, the principle of disciplic succession, and our disciplic succession. So here, Brahma is considered the grandfather, the forefather, and then he passed it on to Narada, who passed it on to others, and in this way, the Vedic knowledge comes down by disciplic succession. We read that in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse 2. Evam parampara praptam imam rajashayo vidu. That the Lord spoke in that particular case. He's spoken the knowledge to many people at different times in different places. In the time referred to in Bhagavad Gita and the place, the Lord spoke the knowledge to Vivasvan, the sun god, who then passed it on to Ikshvaku and then to Manu, and then it was handed on. Yeah. So the system of disciplic succession works like this. And Prabhupada makes the point. You can make an experimental endeavor if you really want to. And you might come to the same conclusion, you might not. It could take you an awfully long time. But just to save time, you should accept the Vedas, the disciplic succession. Now, I'll give you an example just in terms of ordinary life, that in Western medicine, so many, I don't know how many millions of scientists have made experiments to understand how to treat all the various illnesses that there are. And, the different conditions, things that happen to the body. And so now we have a large stock of knowledge about medicine. And so many diseases can be cured. And that knowledge has been acquired by experiment, research, trial and error, all that sort of thing. But now, so it's taken so many millions, hundreds of years to develop the knowledge of medical science which is available to us. But now when you go to medical school, you can basically learn all of that in a few years. Maybe not all of it, but in some fields, you can learn all of it in a few years, which took many people hundreds of years to figure out. So this is the principle of descending knowledge, or getting knowledge by hearing. At the end of this paragraph, number 4, Srila Prabhupada mentions there are 3 kinds of evidence: pratyaksha, anuman, and shabda. Pratyaksha means direct evidence. In fact, aksha means eyes. Yeah. Krishna, one name of Krishna is Adhokshaja, that he's beyond our eyes. So pratyaksha means direct experience, direct evidence. But that's not good. In the following paragraph, well, let's just say what these 3 are: pratyaksha, anuman, and shabda. Prabhupada lists them out, but initially he only talks about pratyaksha. So pratyaksha means direct evidence, direct experience. Anuman means inference, generally. Inference. Yeah, or inductive, you could say inductive. Yeah, but inference is perhaps a better term to use. And then there's shabda, and shabda means hearing, sound. Well, literally, shabda means sound. That's a fact. So anyway, in the following paragraph, number 5 on this page, which starts, direct evidence is not very good because our senses are not perfect. Well, there you have it again, isn't it? And here Prabhupada actually, he gives the example which we mentioned just a little while ago. We're seeing the sun daily and it appears to us just like a small disk, but it is actually far, far larger than many planets. So, of what value is this seeing? Therefore, we have to read books, and then we can understand. If we hear knowledge from authoritative sources, then we can understand, oh, the sun is like this. It's not like a little disk. So then, in this 5th paragraph, on page 4, which starts direct evidence is not very good, Prabhupada then goes on to say, then there is anuman, inductive knowledge. It may be like this, hypothesis. For instance, Darwin's theory says it may be like this, it may be like that. But that is not science. That is a suggestion. And it is also not perfect. Yeah, so Srila Prabhupada, you know, one thing I was told Srila Prabhupada said about Darwin's theory of evolution. Srila Prabhupada, I was told, said that Charles Darwin says that his grandfather was a monkey. And Prabhupada said, and when I hear, some people try to explain this theory of evolution, it sounds so stupid that I think, yes, maybe Darwin's grandfather was a monkey, because the idea is so foolish. Yeah. So we're now, Prabhupada at the end of this paragraph says, if you receive the knowledge from authoritative sources, that is perfect. Yeah, okay. Well, yes, that's good, from authoritative sources. Okay. Now, you know what I want to do, just for interest, we've moved on to the 5th page, and the first paragraph, which begins on the 5th page, I'm actually calling it the 2nd paragraph on that page, because part of the paragraph from the previous page, overflowed onto this page. So in the 2nd paragraph on this page 5, Srila Prabhupada, having spoken about pratyaksha, direct sensory experience, having talked about hypothesis, inductive type of knowledge, suggestion, maybe like this, maybe like that. Now Prabhupada talks about shabda. Yeah. Another name of it is Shruti. Shruti means that this knowledge is received simply by oral reception. The Vedas instruct that in order to understand transcendental knowledge, we have to hear from the authority. So I wanted just to do one thing with you, just for your interest's sake. Prabhupada talks about pratyaksha, anuman, and shabda here as being, the technical term is Brahmanas. Brahmanas, types of evidence, ways of acquiring knowledge. Srila Jiva Goswami in Tattva Sandarbha, he actually gives 10. And I just thought I'd run through them just for your interest's sake. So number 1 is Shabda, spiritual sound, particularly scripture. Number 2 is Pratyaksha, direct perception. Number 3 is inference. And the example he gives is that when the sun is rising, the inference that, oh, look, the sun is rising. You can't see the sun yet, but there's some light coming on the horizon. And then you can infer, yes, this indicates that the sun is rising. I mean, obviously, in this case, it's true. But in many cases, when you try to do inference, it will not work. Then number 4 is upaman, similarity. That men are similar. So what one man is like indicates what another is like, but it may not indicate very accurately. Like some men are very tall, but not all men are very tall. So similarity may help, but it may also not help. Then artapati, implication, to indicate or suggest something which is not explicitly stated. The information about what you're speaking is not explicitly stated. Then anupalabdhi, non-existence, means if something is not there, it gives us some knowledge. Like if we walked through the room and there was a samosa on the table, and then we walk back through the room shortly after, and the samosa is not there. So the non-existence of the samosa tells us someone came and took it. So therefore, non-existence may be a way of getting knowledge. Etiya, tradition, just some traditional understanding that my grandparents did it like this, so I do it like this. Like, on the Parikrama path around Vrindavan town, there's a well just before you reach our temple, just a couple of 100 meters. There's a well on the right-hand side of the Parikrama path. And many people have the tradition that when you pass that well, you must go to it, lean over the well and shout, Radhe, Radhe, and get an echo. It's a tradition. It's just a social tradition somehow or other. Then Arsha means sages, the different opinions of sages. Not parampara, but just the different opinions of different thinkers. Then number 9 is sambhava, possibility. And number 10 is cheshta, a sign. So we accept shabda, as indicated in the second paragraph on page 5. But it's not just shabda. Shabda means sound. What people say, particularly. This also is described by Jiva Goswami and Tattva Sandhava. What we accept is not just shabda, but it's a Paurushaya shabda. Shabda, sound vibration, which comes not from ordinary human sources. Yeah. And, I've got some notes on that. We don't really have time to go through it, I'm afraid, today. But this is the idea. A Paurushaya shabda, sound, spoken information, which comes not from humans, but from people who are on higher levels, the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his associates. So now we come to, let's see, Well, actually, the third paragraph on this page 5, transcendental knowledge is knowledge from beyond this universe. This is apaurushaya. Within this universe is material knowledge, and beyond this universe is transcendental knowledge. We cannot even go to the end of the universe, so how can we go to the spiritual world? Thus, to acquire full knowledge just by your own means is impossible. So then Srila Prabhupada, in the 4th paragraph on page 5, there is a spiritual sky. So Prabhupada says there is a spiritual sky, another nature which is beyond manifestation and non-manifestation. That means that the material world is sometimes like now. So the material world is here, we're living in it, there are planets, life is going on. But then sometimes it becomes unmanifest. It becomes destroyed. And then later on, Mahavishnu glances over just the material nature. And again, the material world as we know it becomes manifest. So there's another nature, a spiritual nature, which is beyond the manifest and non-manifest material nature. And Prabhupada raises the question, how will you know that there's a sky where the planets and inhabitants are eternal, the spiritual sky? How are you going to know? The knowledge, it's possible to know, but how are you going to experiment? They talk about going to the moon or Mars and things like this, but, they've got nowhere near going out of the universe and approaching the spiritual world. It's just so far beyond what they even talk about doing. So Prabhupada says, therefore you have to take the assistance of the Vedas, Vedic knowledge, because this is a Parushaya Shabda. It's coming from beyond the limited human sphere. It's coming from the sphere of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So then Prabhupada goes on in the same paragraph to point out that we accept Vedic knowledge, and Vedic knowledge comes from Krishna. Krishna is accepted as the highest authority. Prabhupada goes on actually for the rest of the paragraph to make the point, or to point out how so many great authorities have accepted Krishna. He refers to the Mayavadis and the personalists, or the Vaishnavas, the impersonalists who think that God is not a person, and the personalists who take it that God is a person. And of course, the personalists, they accept Krishna. Prabhupada mentions Ramanuja, Madhva, Vishnu Swami, all these great Vaishnav personalist devotees. They accept Krishna as the supreme authority. But even Prabhupada makes the point, Shankaracharya and the impersonalists also accept, because Shankaracharya wrote the verse, Narayana Paro Vyaktat. That's the Sanskrit. Sanskrit's not quoted there, but Prabhupada translates, Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is beyond this cosmic manifestation. Narayana, Paro, means superior to, Avyaktat, this manifest and unmanifest cosmic manifestation. And then he accepts Narayan is beyond the cosmic manifestation, and then that Narayan is Krishna. Krishna is the source of that Narayan. And he even mentions, this is Shankaracharya, even mentions that this Krishna has become the son of Devaki and Vasudeva. Hare Krishna, devotees. Okay, so we will carry on from here tomorrow. We're on page 5, and we will go on to paragraph 5, and we'll see if we can possibly finish the introduction tomorrow. It's quite possible we will. Anyway, we'll see. So there you go. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.